Welcome back to Redefine Parenting with your host, Veenu Keller. We want to welcome you to Spanglish World Network and H.E.R Network on Zingo TV, channels 250 and 251. Zingo TV is a free app that can be downloaded on iOS and Android devices. While you download, make sure to rate and leave a comment. Zingo TV is also available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire and Fire Sticks, Roku and Roku Sticks, and all smart TVs 2016 and forward. Redefine Parenting is a revolutionary approach to nurturing our children. Veenu will bring you live experts, transformative insights, and a fresh perspective, all aimed at helping families worldwide truly understand their children. Together, let's give them a childhood they won't have to heal from. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Redefine Parenting. I'm so excited to have this guest on today because we are dealing with, I get this more and more from all the parents I coach, is how do we motivate our kids? How do we motivate them to get up and want to do school? You know, that's one of the biggest things, is that they don't want to do it, you know? And so I have a special guest, Michael, is it Huber? Huber, excuse me, Michael Huber.
That's good.
As my guest. He is a certified mental health consultant, and but he's used that skill to really advocate for athletes. So, Michael, please tell us a little bit about you and how you got into this.
Sure. Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. So I got into this as a mental performance coach, as a sports psychology professional, much later in life. You know, I was in my early 40s and I was sort of going through a midlife crisis and working with my own children, coaching them, always being a lover of sports. I just was like, I want to do something different with my life, and wanted to make a bigger impact, I guess, in that space. And so I went back to school. I got a master's degree in sports psychology, and I set out on this journey to sort of coach young athletes in terms of their mindset, their mental health, their mental performance, and really try to be a guide for them, because of the things that I experienced as a young person when I was an athlete. And I've witnessed with my own children and other people's children as a coach. I just felt like there was a lot of space in the world to try to come in and help those populations, have a better experience, I guess is the best way to put it.
Right. Which I think is amazing, because I think that we learn most from like when we dive in with our own kids and we realize like, hey, there's a deficit in this area. How can if it's happening with my kids, how is it also affecting the world? And so we start to see that. And one of the things that I love about coaching is it's really not much difference from coaching in athletes. And so I'm really excited to have you here, because we're also not just on channels 250 and 251, but we're actually on Zingo TV 249 tonight because of you. So thank you. We get a whole nother channel today for the interest of, helping kids perform at the level that they can. And I know that there's just a lot of pressure though, because I even I remember when my oldest son, who's now 30, he was in high school and he was playing football. And the coaches yelled at them. You're not doing this right. What are you doing? You're not thinking. Open your eyes. Like so many comments to these players. And their morale is already low, by the way. They're losing. They're already down. And I was like in my Tony Robbins era, where I was like really learning about Tony Robbins. And I was like, if your approach isn't working, change your approach. And what I started to learn from just listening to my own words about change your approach is, are we changing our approach with these kids? Yelling at your kids or anyone's kids when they're already down on their luck, they're already losing, is not motivating them to do more. And I know that was old school, make them feel bad so they want to feel better, and they'll progress and they'll do better. But what I have noticed, and I had my son's soccer coach on here a while ago, because I just adored the way he coached my son and all the kids. Actually, he built them up. He says, you know what? No worries. You missed it. That's okay. What do you need to do next time? Where do you need to be? What's showing up for you? You're not playing your best today. So what's going on? It's like asking these questions and then asking them, I'm teaching you this skill for what? What is this skill going to give you guys? And I just was like, where was this coaching when I was growing up, or even when my kids were growing up? It's so much more positive,
Mhm. That
which
sounds amazing, by the way.
yeah. He really is a great coach. And but I also found out that it motivated them more.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, so I think, as I was thinking about coming on the show and thinking about the topic of motivating kids, I think the best way I could say it, and maybe this is a little technical wonky from my is creating the conditions for motivation, right?
Mm,
I think there is this old school mentality about what motivation is, right? I'm going to yell and scream at you, or I'm going to punish you, or I'm going to put you down so that you get motivated to do more. But that's not really creating the conditions for motivation. Like as adults, I think we kind of fall in this bucket too, right? Whenever somebody keeps telling us what to do, or they make us feel bad about ourselves, we're going to actually, in most cases, be less likely to want to do it. So, what can we do to make those kids want to do more, right?
right.
One is, okay, certainly positive feedback helps. I love that coach that you described, your son's soccer coach, tells them why they're doing what they're doing, right? To understand the purpose, right? Because if someone tells me what to do and I don't know why I'm doing it, I'm going to resist it. If someone tells me what to do and I get the point, now I'm going to go do it because I have an objective to achieve.
Right.
Right? So the other thing I think that's really big for kids is giving them a sense of autonomy, right? Now, obviously, when they're little, right, you kind of got to guide them and direct them and mold them, and you can't like let them run wild, right? But you want them to feel like they're in control of their experience. That's where the questions come are so valuable, right? Hey, what could you do differently? Or why do you like playing this game? Or right, like what did you do well, right? You're getting them thinking about their own experience. So now they become problem solvers. Now I want to go do something different and better to see if I can get better and grow, right? And become more competent versus feeling like, oh, my coach or my dad or my mom's telling me I'm not good enough and I'm 10 years old and I just feel bad. Well, if I feel bad, I'm not going to play good. I talk to kids about this all the time, whether they're 10, 15, or 20. If you feel bad, you're going to play bad. If you think negatively, you're going to feel bad. And that goes around in a loop, right? So, how is we as adults can we create the environment for them to feel good about themselves and want to get better through solving their own problems?
I love that. I love that. And so how does that translate from the field to the homes? Like, especially like when your kids don't want to go to school because school is hard. There's nothing
Yeah,
easy about it. If it was easy, and I tell my kids that all the time, I said, what's easy is if I put you back into kindergarten, but you're not learning because you
right.
already know it. It's hard because you don't know and you have to learn a new skill.
Yes. Well, as a parent of two teenagers, I think for me, the hardest part with my children is helping them understand the why. Why do I need to go to school? Yeah, I get it. I have to go by law. And yes, I have to go and get good grades because I'm going to go to college. But it's very perfunctory, right? It's a very like transactional relationship for them, right? And I think the challenge with teenagers or younger kids is like, well, they can't really see the future. They can't see that path of like, I really should want to go to school because I want to be this, or I want to do this, or I want to grow into this career. They don't know that yet. So the other piece of motivation that I think is really, really important is the relatedness piece, right? That's sort of from the research, but the connections, right? Like going to school is about being with your friends, is about having relationships, smiling, having fun. Now, obviously, we know with young kids, sometimes school isn't always fun because there's kid drama and there's all sorts of stuff. But by and large, right, you go to school to be with your friends. It's better than sitting home in your bedroom alone by yourself, locked in the room, right? Like that could be the motivation to go to school. Hey, you get to go see your friends today. Hey, you get to go to soccer practice. You
Right.
get to go do this versus feeling like, oh, I've got to do this busy work and I don't understand what the point is. And I'd rather be doing something else.
Right. So what I'm hearing you say also is turn your have tos to get tos.
Mm,
Like make it a
that's right.
privilege, help them understand. Like I remember with my older kids, I'd say, "Do you know how lucky you are to go to school?" Like there's kids in different countries that would dream to go to school and they can't.
Hmm.
He's like, "Well, they could take my place." Like they had an answer to that, like let them take my place. It's like, don't waste food. They're starving kids in China. Well, then mail it to them, right? It's
Right.
like so it is like figuring out. And here's the thing about motivation though. Motivation only lasts as long as that emotion does.
Mm,
Once that emotion is gone, the motivation is gone. So what I see with kids, and I tell parents this also, is figure out the purpose. Make
Yes.
it bigger beyond than just the day. What's the purpose? Like, I have a client who who lives in Colorado, and she's not doing well in school. She
Mhm.
doesn't want to be there, but yet she wants to be a nurse. So
Right.
if you want to be
Exactly.
a nurse, this is don't think about, oh, I have to get through high school. Think about, I get to do high school because this is the first step to being a nurse.
Yes, and that's actually I love that, and I love the way you said that, and I think it's very similar to the way I think about things. Is a lot of times with like the athletes that I work with, like the visual I'll give them is a ladder, and at the top of the ladder, there's something at the top for them to get. Well, in order to get to the top, you've got to take all these rungs, right? So, what are those rungs, right? Today, the bottom rung is I have to go to class and do my homework because if I want to get an A in the class, I need to do this. If I get an A in the class, now my GPA goes up. If my GPA goes up, I'm more likely to go to the school I want to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So they can start to visualize the progression of, hey, there's this thing at the top of the ladder, and these are the things I have to do every day, even if I don't feel like doing them today. I think the other piece of motivation as a parent that's really, really hard is there are going to be some days where your kids don't want to go to school or they show
Right.
up in those ways. I mean, obviously they go or they have to go, but it's okay. Like if you go to school and you're not motivated and you don't do the work or you don't do your homework, there's a consequence to that. Now, obviously, don't want your kid to go to school 200 days out of the year and not do any work because they're going to flunk out. But if there's a day that your kid doesn't turn something in and they get a zero on an assignment or they get in trouble, right? Like that's a learning experience, right? And I think as parents, we're just so invested emotionally in that. Like if my kid doesn't turn his home in his or her homework, I feel like the bad person, the bad
Right.
parent. Then all of a sudden that's where that controlling, forcing you, like you got to do this, because it's not because it's gonna send their future into the toilet. It's because I feel bad as a parent. And I think that's one of the things I'm constantly working on is, hey, if you want to, go sideways on this, that's your prerogative, son or daughter. I'll help reel you back in, but sometimes you got to feel the pain in order to make a change. Everything can't be completely perfect all the time.
I agree. I was just talking to a parent today, and it's like how much, like, because let's be honest, none of us parents want to see our kids suffer. We don't. If they feel like they're incompetent at math or science, or
Hmm.
they feel dumb and stupid, because comparison steals our joy, and that's what
Yeah,
kids do. They compare,
100%.
and so the mom's feeling bad because, like, how do I solve it for them? And I'm like, here's the deal: you can't. You cannot solve it for them. What you can do is ask them, what do they want? If you were to support them, what would that look like to them? How would they be able to receive the support from you? And allow them to create that tough skin. And I use the example of a carpenter with a hammer. You know, if that is your profession, you get calluses on your hand because your body naturally protects itself so you can continue to do your job.
Hmm.
We need those emotional calluses to be able to go against the mean girls, to figure out you're not number one in your class, to feel that your lunch looks different from their lunches, and to be able to go through that and realize, does those little things really have to affect how you feel about yourself? And of course in the beginning it does, but it's building up that emotional callus where all of a sudden one day you go and it doesn't affect you anymore, because you're like, well, you know what, you're entitled to your opinion, and you're right. I'm not number one in that class. And that is okay, because I really don't like this class. And I'm really just trying to get by.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm going to steal that because I like that phrase is true, right? You're getting exposure to these uncomfortable situations where at first you hate it. It feels terrible, but eventually you start to go through that process of change and accepting the situation. And then when you accept it, the emotion dissipates. And now you can look at it more objectively and go, okay, well, what can I do differently to change the outcomes? In the beginning, sometimes you got to feel those feelings and process them. And when you're going through that, it's really hard to feel confident or motivated or whatever. And that's just temporary if you kind of process it and you have a way to move forward. And I think some of those questions that you pose just hypothetically, like, how can I support you? What does that look like? I mean, those are incredible questions to ask a kid. And sometimes, actually, what I find working with athletes is they don't know. It's so
Yes.
foreign. It's so foreign to them. Like, what can I do to help you? Or what are your strengths? I'll ask kids, like, what are you good at? And they're like, I
Uh,
don't know. And I'm like, really? You don't know what you're good at? And because I think it's just because in the environment, they're just so used to that ongoing criticism of you need to do all these things better. And all the things that you do well are not recognized. They're sort of taken for granted.
I was just going to say that. When you ask kids, what do you do great? They don't know, but they do know what they don't do great, what they're constantly getting in trouble for, what their consequences are,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and because they have less praise, we have less celebration. And that's one of the things I teach my clients all the time is like, what are you celebrating? Like the first thing I do when I get on a coaching call is I ask my client, they'll go, oh, let me tell you. And I'm like, hold up, let's take a breath. Tell me what's been great this week. Tell me what's been great the last 2 weeks.
Mm,
Like, I want them to really just take a moment and kind of reflect because that's what we don't do. We're so busy in the
mm-hmm.
get up and go of life. We're not actually taking that time to really absorb what was great that I did today and what could be better. What could
Mm-hmm.
I have done differently today? If something doesn't feel good to me, where am I putting my energy? Where am I putting
Mm-hmm.
my power? Because that's what grows, by the way.
Yep.
If you put your power into not wanting to go to school, not being your best at practice because you're tired, right? Because it's an energy sucker. You are tired. That means tired is I have no energy. That's what it's
Mm-hmm.
anonymous, right? So when you don't have the energy, then you're not going to be motivated to do anything. And
Right.
so motivation also comes with energy. And
Yeah.
so one of the things I say to my families is, how are they sleeping? What does their nutrition look like?
Mm-hmm.
Because excitement is
Yes.
definitely a motivator to get your kid going. Like, it's funny because kids don't like school, but they're always excited for the first day. Always excited for the first day. They can't sleep at night, right? So their sleep's gone, but they're still up and ready to go. I remember my son, who's now 26, to get him up to go to school was like pulling teeth throughout his whole entire, like, I was so excited when he graduated because I didn't have to get him up anymore. Like I literally would get him up and I'm like, are you up? Are you up? And he'd be, yeah. He's like, yes, mom, I'm up. So I'd go back to my room and then I'm like, I don't hear him going to the bathroom. And I would go into his room and he'd literally be sitting up in bed sleeping, like, but sitting up. And I'm like, you are not moving. And it startled him. And so, and that was like at 6 in the morning. But if he had to go surfing, ooh, that boy was up at 5 a.m. If
Mm-hmm.
he was going deer hunting, oh, he was up at 4:30 in the morning to go deer hunting. I didn't have to wake him up. Miraculously, he would hear the alarm on those days where I didn't have to get him up. But school, oh gosh, no. And now as an adult, I was asking him, I was joking with the other day, and I'm like, so how do you get up for work? And he's like, well, I set an alarm. And I'm like, oh, that's so funny that you can do that now. What a big boy. I'm so proud of you. And we laughed about it. But he's like, mom, I have to. Like, it's a have to because there's consequences if I'm late to work.
Yeah.
So the two things that motivate him are the have tos because of consequences and the excitement of getting to do something that he loves to do.
Yes.
And that's just it. We'll do more to avoid pain than we will to go towards pleasure. And the pain of consequences actually ends up motivating us to do it. So that's why, as parents, think I have to enforce consequences. I have to show them what the pain is. That's not working anymore.
Well, I think it's also the time frames matter, right? In the short term, that can work. Over an extended period of time, that's where you start to see people burn out on a job, they burn out on a sport, they burn out on whatever, a relationship. If you show up and you feel like every day I have to do this, it has that like just a slog. Eventually you're going to go, I don't want to do this anymore, right? Which is why people who do work that they love are much more likely to get out of bed in the morning and go, wow, this is great. I get to do this because I love my work because there's a purpose, right? There is a have to element to it some days, but most days it's like, I love what I do. If I go to a job that I don't like, then it's just a bunch of have tos every single day. And then after a couple of years, you're like, oh, I can't do this anymore, right? So those, I think balancing them is important and being aware of it. And can I go back to what you said
Yeah,
in this
absolutely.
about reflection? It's so important, right? And I think that reflective process needs to be balanced. To your point as a coach, right? What was great this week? I think When it comes to reflection, it's usually beating ourselves up. What could I have done better? That was terrible. That was terrible. What's wrong with me? And it's not, hey, what did I do well?
Right.
Right. And what do I want to look differently in the future? How do I learn from that reflection and have it be balanced and objective versus just emotional? Because now that emotional reflection will you can't get rid of it. It's going to drag with you versus going, okay, did something well, learn something. Okay, let's leave the emotion behind, take the information and go forward and get better. And that's a practice, right? Whether you're an adult or you're a young person, and they have to be taught to reflect in that way, which is why I like journaling as an exercise so much for young people, and usually prompted journals, very simple, low investment of time, low maintenance, but very basic of start the day, end the day. What do I want to accomplish? What did I accomplish? What could I have done better? What do I want to do tomorrow? Real simple stuff, but getting them to start thinking about things that way versus, oh my God, I did everything so terrible today. It was such a bad day and I don't want to go to school tomorrow because that's the way we're programmed. Our brain works that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The other thing is investigating, like what is going on at school? Like what's making it such a challenge? Is it,
Yes.
beyond the schoolwork, beyond that you don't like the classes? Like, is there something else that's happening
Mhm.
in your life in this moment where you actually feel that it's taken away from your self-esteem and self-worth? And kids are having a hard time talking to parents about it,
Yes.
especially parents are so emotionally invested. Like they want to fix it for their kids. And I'm like, you can't fix it for your
Nope.
kids. Like as much as you want to, you can't. And with that, they see the parents' emotional distress. So now they don't want to come to you because they don't want to disappoint you. They don't want you hurting. They don't want you worrying about them.
Mhm.
And then they keep running into the same wall at school that they're not fitting in or whatever. And it's like, where's that balance, right?
Yes.
And here's what's funny is kids are still motivated to go and they're still motivated to go and because of the social aspect of
Yes.
it, right? And that is a key thing. And what I find with my clients that aren't motivated to go to school is that they're lacking that connection with
Mhm.
a good friend group and
Yes.
understanding the friend group that you're connecting with. Is it going to move you forward in life or hold you back?
That's a great point, and that's something that I've certainly learned the hard way in my life. Because sometimes you become friends with people just by inertia, right? You're there around them every day. Like, what do they say, right? You're the sort of amalgam of the 5 people
For
you spend the
people.
most time with, right? And I think that's really very accurate, right? And sometimes we end up in these groups where we feel comfortable, but it's not ideal, but we don't want to break away because it's too
Right.
uncomfortable. And now we're sort of stuck, right? But if you have that group of people that they have your values, they have your back, you can trust them, right? Like now you're going to be much more likely to be like, yeah, this is going to be great. I get to go see these people, right? Because they're really like that connection is there, and that's hard. That can be really hard to find and maintain, especially when you're in high school.
Yeah. And I also think that what used to happen back when I was growing up, now I grew up in the 70s and 80s, so I know it's a long time ago, but because I didn't have a lot of connection from people at school, I was bullied. I was one of those people that felt left out a lot, felt excluded. So I would try to go help the teacher. I'd be like, do you need any help? And I'd stay
Mm-hmm.
after school and I'd put the chairs up for her, or I'd get to school early and I'd take the chairs down. And I'd be excited because it would be my little job and it's something I got to do.
Mm-hmm.
I would get to race the chalkboards back then. We had chalkboards.
That was a big deal.
It was because it gave me connection. It made me
Yeah.
feel seen. It
Yeah.
made me feel some worth, like I was worth doing something and I was valued for that. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what kids are losing right now.
Yes.
They don't see where they're valued in this world. And that's why sports are so important.
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, I never played sports thinking like I'm going to be in the Olympics or something one day. I played sports for that moment to feel again like I had purpose, I had value, there was
Yeah.
worth to me. You know, um, Not that there's any professional field hockey, I don't know. It's not like baseball and soccer and all that. But like my son, he loves soccer. He wants to be in the World Cup. He wants to meet Messi.
Mm-hmm.
Like he was Messi for Halloween, like got these tattoos all up and down his legs. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, Messi has these sleeves on his legs. I'm like, you're going to school like that? He's like, yeah, it's costume day. but he wanted to be Messi, and that's what he
Mhm.
was. And he he emulates that. He watches videos that he says and like what he does, and is learning his value. Like, what does he value in life? And that's one of the things too. It's like, pick someone that you see that's doing what you want to do, and find out what you can about them. What do they value? What's their morning schedule like?
Mhm.
What's their evening schedule like? And copy it. Don't reinvent the world, the wheel, you
Yeah.
know? And as you do that, you develop that. And I tell him, because I've had people go, well, do you know how hard it is to get the World Cup? And I'm like, I'm sure it was just as hard for the people that are in the World Cup to get there as a kid as it is for my kid. And so who am I to poo-poo on it? I'm going to promote that as much as I can. And he has a backup plan. He's like, if that doesn't work out, then I want to do something with sports. And so we
Yeah.
talk about sports management and different else of things. And I said, but let's not focus on it not working out. Let's focus on it is working out.
Yeah. I think it's so important, right? Like, if here's the thing, right? If someone tells you they want to play at the highest level like that in the world stage in the World Cup, the odds are super slim. To me, if you want to have that dream, that's great. For me, it's more about, okay, if that's your dream, and you kind of alluded to this, are my actions aligned with what I want?
That's
Right?
what
Whether or not I make the World Cup, I'll get over it. But if I wake up every day and behave like a World Cup elite global type of soccer player, like, I'm going to be better for it no matter what, whether I achieve my result or not. But if somebody tells me I want to play soccer, in the World Cup, and then I wake up and I eat a bag of candy and I scroll my phone for 4 hours, like, now that's where it starts to feel like, okay, maybe that's a little bit more unrealistic, but we don't have to poo poo the dream. We got to go, okay, well, this is your dream and you see what you're doing. Like, that's not going to get you there. Right. And starting to connect the dots between, well, if I really want this, some of these micro level behaviors have to change sooner rather than later, because you don't really have that much time. And it's hard for a kid. Right. So I think a lot of people will throw that's not realistic at a kid. And I just don't believe in that. If that's what you want, go do it, but you got to do it, right? You got to figure out, like you said, what the tasks and actions are that align with that behavior or with that result, so you can at least put yourself on that path to say, I gave it everything I could.
Right, and I love that, and I do that, like, right? So I use that as the pull. One of my mentors, Joseph McClendon III, says, "Create the pull, don't do the push." And
Yes.
so his pull is the World Cup. So, when we're having bad days, I'm like, "So if you were going to the World Cup, what would that look like for you? How would you behave now? If your behavior meant it was going to lead you to the World Cup, is this the behavior you would have?" You know,
Mm-hmm.
because you're going to get a lot of no's on the way. So how are you behaving with the no's? Like, when I tell you no, I'm getting you ready. I'm getting you ready for the world. And I tell parents that all the time. I mean, the moment that your kid can't take a no is the day that you need to like look at, what do I need to do differently?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because as an adult, I can't tell you how many no's there were. As much as I wasn't grateful how many no's I got from my mom, I'm grateful now as an adult, because it's learning that you're going to miss every shot you don't take. So I'm going to take the shot, but I'm going to take the shot knowing that I could miss. But at least I have the gratitude that I took the shot and it
Yeah.
feels good. And that's what I'm teaching my kids now too, is that you got to ask, you got to advocate. You
Yes.
want a certain position on that field, you got to go to your coach. Well, he's not going to because I'm not this. And I'm like, and so you're not that, and that's okay. But you know what? You're going to go let him know that and so we're going to change his filter so he can say, well, maybe he is a forward.
Right.
Maybe I could put him there. But he doesn't even know to change his filter because you're not giving him an opportunity to see that.
Well, that's one of the biggest things, that is subjects that I come up with my own children, and with the high school, the teenagers I work with, right? Which is, you've got to advocate for yourself, because what they're not very good at doing, just from a developmental perspective, is being able to empathize, right? Like, you've got a coach with a roster full of players. You're not the only one. He's got a family, or she's got a family. They have a job. They've got all these things. If you think they're home thinking about you being a forward instead of a midfielder or a defender, you're probably missing out, right? So if you want to change the filter, right, what's in your control is to go to communicate with the coach, right? How am I going to communicate to my coach that this is what I'm hoping to achieve? And opening that door to a dialogue, changing the filter, or asking the question of what do I need to do differently, or what could I do to put myself in this position? And I think, that'll make sense. And I think kids understand that, but the emotion is so strong a lot of times of, I don't want to be rejected. I don't want that outreach or or those questions or that conversation to be used against me. So I would rather just not do anything. But then that creates an internal reaction, right? An anxiety, a stress level about, now I'm playing mind reader. What does my coach think about me? Why aren't I playing? All this different stuff. And it lives up here. And now it becomes this sort of, boiling tea kettle. And that's where I start to see with athletes, that's where the performance suffers, because there's a performance anxiety, there's a stress level, and all of it sort of living internally. And they're not able to sort of externalize it to try to balance the scales, because they're afraid of what's going to happen, or they start to tell themselves stories in their head that may be true or not, but they're not giving themselves a chance to work it
Right.
out by having a conversation.
Right. I totally agree. And the other thing that I feel, just to piggyback on what you're saying, is
Mm-hmm.
asking your kids, what is that voice in your head telling you?
Yeah.
I think that we don't do that. We don't do that enough. I mean, nobody ever asked me, what's the voice in your head telling you? Because I'd tell you some stories.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's asking them, when you're on that field, or when you're getting ready to go up to bat or whatever,
Yeah.
what's the voice in your head saying? Is it saying, you got this? Oh my gosh, you're going to do so good. You're going to knock it out of the park. Or is it saying like, oh, you suck, you're not good, you shouldn't even be batting, why are you even
Yeah.
here? Like, we have got to start helping our kids have their mind, which I say is the ego, that voice in our heads, our ego, that
Yep.
wants us to play small because it doesn't want us to get hurt.
Of
It's
course.
stepping out of that and answering back and advocating beyond that.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I find extremely valuable in my work is explaining to young people how the brain works, which is exactly what you said, right? Your brain is a survival like demon, right? It's trying to protect you from anything bad, right? And from an evolutionary standpoint, it's trying to protect you from physical harm and mortal threat. But now we live in a world where those things typically don't exist. So now we're trying to protect ourselves from bad feelings, right? So it's like, well, I don't want to go take that risk because it's going to feel bad. So I'm just going to play it safe, or I'm going to play it small, or I'm not going to try. And then I'm putting myself in a place where I can't actually feel good about myself and succeed. But I think when kids understand like that's what the brain's trying to do to them, now all of a sudden it's like they understand why. Okay, I get it. So when I have that negative voice in my head, I can go, oh, my brain's trying to trick me here, or my brain's trying to protect me here. Let's make sense of it, right? And sometimes we can tell ourselves, hey, I got this. And sometimes that positive self-talk can backfire, right? Doesn't matter to me is if you're aware of the self-talk and you understand that maybe it's not real. Now I could start to do something different, whether it's talk to myself differently, take a deep breath, visualize something, whatever it is that I can do, whatever strategy I can come up with. When I recognize that negative thought, I can do something more productive with it versus buying into it and having it become this massive snowball that we can't escape.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. And one of the strategies that I tell families is that when you're learning about that positive self talk or negative self talk, especially if it's negative, is having your child empower them to acknowledge, like, I
Mm-hmm.
hear you.
Yes.
You're right. I'm not the best player. Thank you for showing me. But today I'm going to show you. Today I'm going to go out there
Yeah.
and I'm going to fail forward. It's like, it's exactly when going backwards, when we were talking about, when you ask kids, like, what do you want? And they're like, I don't know. And they don't. So give them a plethora of things. Like, let them know, and go back to like when you were 14, go back to when you were 15. What would you have wanted? Put yourself in that
Yes. There
circumstance
you go.
and ask, like, what would you want? And honestly, Mike, that's how I got into this work,
Mm,
is that I never thought I was going to be working with parents and kids. Like, I wasn't the perfect parent, believe it or not, with my two boys. I definitely failed forward, and I did the best that I could with what I knew at that time. And now that I have twins that are 12, I've learned from that and I still fail forward. And the point is that when I was growing up, nobody asked me what I wanted. Nobody
mhm,
asked me. They just made an assumption.
mhm.
Well, she's depressed, so she's sad, or she has anxiety. I didn't have anxiety. I just didn't want to go there. I didn't want to go to school. I didn't want to be bullied anymore. Nobody knew what it was doing to me
Right.
internally, and it was like, oh, ignore them. Well, ignoring them did not help because it made other people pounce on me. And so the strategies I was given, it was given off of what they thought was
That's
going
right.
on. Nobody asked me what was going on. And so as I grew up and I grew through
Mhm.
the issues I had, I don't even call it trauma because it doesn't stay with me anymore. It's just what happened. And it was a gift to me what happened.
Yeah.
And now that I've gone through it, I help kids grow through that. I help kids realize that this is happening. You're absolutely right. Let's not label it good or bad. Let's
Right.
figure out, how are you going to get through it?
Yeah, right. And so the concept that, you didn't use the word, but you said it, is acceptance, which is something that I'm extremely big on, right? And it could be when I'm talking to a parent of one of my client athletes or one of the athletes themselves, is you're a human. You're going to feel a certain way. You're going to think negatively sometimes. You're going to make mistakes, right? Accept that, right? I'm not saying you have to like it, but accept it, because when you accept it, then you can go, okay, it's okay to be human. Now, what can I do differently? I'm going to go
Yeah.
grow through that failure. I'm going to grow through that learning experience versus using it as like a tool to pummel ourselves. And one of the things that I love to introduce to young people is mindfulness and meditation for that reason, right? Getting better at accepting your thoughts, the way they run through your head, at a million miles an hour. They're going to run through your head, rather than labeling everything as good or bad and judging everything. It's like, hey, it just is. That thought came up. It's a thought, right? Maybe I do agree with it. It's okay. What are we going to do? It's okay to be normal and human. And I
Right.
think you're right. I think generationally, I was raised the same way. Don't feel that way because I don't want to feel that way. So you shouldn't feel that way. No, I am feeling this way, right? And so, unfortunately, for those of us who are a little bit older, I had to learn too. Like, this is the way I have to learn how to process stuff. I had to learn it as an adult. I wasn't able to learn it as a child.
Right. And it's interesting because I hear more and more, my kids isolating, my kids staying in their room. How old are they? 14, 15, 16. These are the ages that they are learning how to be themselves,
Yes,
and they don't want to disappoint you as a parent. And that doesn't mean that they're depressed. It means that they have stuff going on. They're trying to
yeah,
solve it. They want to be alone, how to solve it. They want to learn because parents aren't letting their kids do it anymore. Parents want to do it for their kids.
correct.
I mean, people that I know, like clients, they do the homework for their kids, and you're not doing them a service.
Mm-mm.
You're really not doing them a service. It's and one of my clients told me, I just wish my mom would not do it for me. And which is I ironic because I mean most kids would be like, oh, your parent does it. Will they do mine too? But this kid's like, no, I don't want her to do it. I want to do it. I just don't want to be rushed to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, one of the things that I'm teaching parents, and I'm writing my book now, Parenting from Greatness,
Mm-hmm.
is allowing your kids to feel their feels of what's going on. What
Yeah.
do they need? Not just here, but throughout their whole body. What's
Mm-hmm.
congruent with them right now, where they're not going to fight you on it? It's giving them the controlled control. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
here, you have 3 hours. Here's a plethora of things you need to do. You tell me the order you want to do it. And what can I do to support you in getting it done?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Versus you need to do this at this time and get it done. And you have to do this. And if you can't do it, then fine, I'll do it for you. Like,
Right. Well, and it goes back to what you said before, right? The pull versus the push. Giving them the blueprint, or giving them an outline to say, hey, here are the conditions. How do you want to do this? How are you going to get it done? Making them feel like they are independent and autonomous, and they can be the ones who own the experience of, like, this is my homework, right? I can do with it what I want, whatever that ends up being, versus, no, if you don't do it this way, then it's bad. And I think you're absolutely right. And I think some of it's human nature, right? Like, it's so hard for us as parents to watch, you said this earlier, watch our kids fail
yeah,
and have, do something where we know we could give them the information that is going to help them avoid discomfort that we've already been through. But that's just not the way it works, right? Like, it doesn't matter. You can give your best advice in the world, right? But if you tell your kid black, they're going to say white. You tell them up, they're going to say down, just because they don't want you to do it for them, right? And what I find is when I talk to kids who are not my own, They love to talk to me. And I, obviously I'm coaching them in a way like you are, but at the same time, it's just that independent objectivity that's not, there's not so much emotional
Judgment.
intertwining, right? Yes.
And they don't feel the
Right.
judgment from us, right? Because like some
Correct.
people, I had one person say this to me years ago. They're like, "Your kids are not your walking, talking business card." And I'm like, "Thank God. Thank God, because they're
Yeah.
not. My kids are not my business card. My kids are kids that have temper tantrums. My kids are ones that talk back. My kids, I say sometimes I'm like, I'm no longer the parent whisperer. I'm the parent yeller. Like, what is going on here? And this is just me being honest. Like, this is my
Yeah.
life. And my kids have coaches because I'm not a coach. I'm a mom. And people sometimes are like, well, that doesn't make sense because you teach all these strategies. I do. And I have my own blind spots. It's
Yes.
easy for me to come into your spot without the emotional attachment, without the
Uh,
emotional judgment, without all the rules that you have and see what's going on versus living in my life with my judgment, my rules, and my expectations, and having someone else help me focus on that.
yeah.
And I always say a heart surgeon would not do open heart surgery on their kid.
Right.
They just won't. And so why would a coach coach their own kid? Why would the
Right.
expectation of what I'm helping your kid do would be on my kid because I'm not seeing that.
Yeah.
And it's differently structured too as a coach.
Yeah.
We're not giving out consequences. We're not giving out, punishment.
Yeah.
It's they have an open, safe, and trusting space with us where they
Yeah.
can actually download the stuff that's going on. And I'm going to tell you, kids are doing a heck of a lot more these days than you and I were doing at our age.
A, a, 100%. Yeah. And it's like there's all these resources, and kids are much more aware, right? Like they know it's out there. They know the issues. They actually know where to find help. It's just a matter of whether or not they want to go find it, right? But that the same for all of us, right? And I think you just what you said there about being a parent, like I wrestle with this as somebody who's, quote unquote, supposed to understand how to act and how to think and how to talk. And I'm still a dad, right? Like I'm still in that, and I make mistakes, and it's okay. And I think the key with anything for me is awareness, right? If I'm aware that I'm saying or doing or thinking or feeling something that makes me uncomfortable, I got to look at it and go, okay, if I want this to be different, I have to have an intention that's different going forward. And
Absolutely.
sometimes I have a blind spot, and that's okay. It's okay. It's also one of the biggest things that I believe, whether as a father, as a coach, and I tell this to parents is, if you make a mistake as a parent, you do something wrong, whatever, like take ownership, hold
Yes.
yourself accountable, say you're sorry. I'm sorry that I did this. I thought I was helping you, but I wasn't. Right
Right.
now, all of a sudden, there's this mutual respect where it's like, I see you. I was trying to help you. I was wrong and I'm sorry. That just goes to me, it just goes such a long way in terms of building that trusting relationship with your child where they are going to keep coming back to you when you need something because you're being seen versus, oh, I'm never wrong. You're always wrong. And then you just drive that wedge bigger and further apart. And now it's like, well, what happened to my kid? They never come to me. Or where did they go? Well,
Right.
you know?
And I agree with that wholeheartedly. I constantly, when I do something or I I lost my stuff and I was like not in a great mood. When they get home, I apologize. I'm like,
Yeah.
today was not great. And I'm going to own that. And it was not my intention. And this is what I wanted to say. And this is what I wanted to do. And I'm giving them the why behind it.
Yeah.
So it's not just a excuse like, oh, she's just sorry. No, I realize that was not great for me. I should not have projected what was going on in my life on you. You're not that person for me, and I apologize. And you're right, it does give them that understanding. But the other thing that kids are now thinking also is, well, if you yell at me, I'm going to yell at you. If you say this, I'm going to say it to you. Like there's an equalism that's going on with kids. And I do believe that there has to be that same type of I'm not better than you, right? Kids need to know just because I'm mom, I'm not better than you. I'm more experienced than you.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not equal. Once you're able to pay the mortgage, pay the bills, go get yourself to school, go buy your own clothes, buy your own toiletries,
Mm-hmm.
then we'll talk about how equal we are. But until that happens, I'm still mom and you're still kid. And we can have a discussion without that tonality. And that's the other thing is like, how do we motivate conversations? It's getting them to engage and watching our tonality and understanding their tonality. When a
Mhm.
child has a tonality with you, it's literally a defensiveness, or they feel like some type of emotion, because our tonality gives the emotion away.
Mhm.
And so if you're feeling attacked by it, you probably are, but ask them about that. Instead of getting upset, like that tone again, just say, where's that tone coming from?
Yeah.
Because I am not trying to make you defensive. There's nothing to defend here. And I find myself saying that to a lot to my kids. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm not saying this for you to defend. I'm just saying, as a matter of fact, this needs to get done. So, watch your tone and let's
Yeah.
have a discussion about it.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, listen, some of that's just simple, not simple, but emotional regulation, right? When they're younger, they have to learn how to regulate their emotions. And this is something I talk to parents a lot about, where maybe a parent is a little bit concerned about their child in like a preteen stage or even in like 13, 14, 15 age. Sometimes they just grow out of stuff, right? Sometimes they cognitively and emotionally develop to the point where when they're 13, it's a mess, right? Just like the terrible twos. They grow out of the terrible twos and they become 3 and 4 and 5 and it gets better. Well, when they're 13 and 14, maybe they're mouthy, maybe they talk back, maybe they get defensive. And then when they're 15, 16, 17, now all of a sudden they're a little bit more mature and you don't have the same conversations, right? And so as a parent, how do you balance like that understanding of like, hey, like I understand what they're going through, but at the same time, I'm not gonna tolerate it, right? Up to a point, maybe, but then ultimately, like you need to understand that's not acceptable, right? But in 2 or 3 years, they might be having a normal adult conversation with you just because they've grown out of it. There's a lot of, parents have to be patient, I think, in a lot of respects, right? Because things do change and we're not always going to be the ones to change them. It's just going to be something they're going to have to experience on their own.
Absolutely. And that's just it. I see so many kids not experiencing life on their own because their parents, I mean, again, it goes back to, we don't want to see our kids hurt. So we're trying to
Yes.
solve it for them. We're trying to protect them from the hurt. But, when we graduate from high school, college, or whatever, we get congratulated and we feel good. But we don't feel good because we have that piece of paper in our hand. We feel good through all the lessons and all the toughness and all the struggle that we overcame to get to that point.
Hmm.
That's what we feel good about. That's the celebration. It's definitely not that piece of paper,
Right. Right.
and without the struggle, without the angst of going to school and learning all this and, staying up late writing papers before they're due and all this stuff, we would, what are we congratulated for?
Right.
You know, and that's what we need to do. We need to allow our kids to feel their feels. I just did a post the other day, is like how we put on this brave face and we can't let people know that we're hurting, and because then they won't come to us and whatnot. And the truth is, I, as a human, I hurt. I go through my own stuff, and it's okay to feel your feels.
Hmm.
I don't think it's okay to stay there and make all your decisions when you're in that space,
Right.
but it's allowing yourself to feel that and giving yourself some time to feel that and say, okay, I felt it. Now I'm ready to change something, because
Yep.
nothing changes without the action.
Yep.
Nothing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I want to go back to something that you said in there, that idea of like, it's not the piece of paper, right? It's the sort of, it's the actions behind it
The
that
journey.
really
Yeah.
that journey, right? And so like I recently, not too long ago, had a conversation with a young man who was a baseball player in high school and he wasn't getting the results that he wanted. He wasn't playing as much as he wanted. And we were talking about having a conversation with his coach about the situation. So I was really trying to help him through that, give him advice for that conversation, how he should approach it and all those other things. And I said to him, I said, listen, I said, even if you don't get the result that you want at the end of the conversation, right, which is more playing time, this is about building character. When you're in your 20s and you have a job and you need to go knock on your door and talk to your boss about a problem, or you want a raise or you want a promotion, you're going to feel good that you're able at 16 or 17 years old. I did that with my coach. I walked in the door, I behaved like an adult. I had a grown-up conversation that I initiated, and I can feel good about myself as a person that I was able to do this. And that's what sports is about. That's what parenting is about, right? This is about becoming a better human so that we can operate in the world more effectively, right? It's not just about the outcomes that everybody's looking for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we are almost out of time. This has been a great discussion. I probably need to
Thank
bring you
you.
back because I could probably go for an hour with us
Me
back and
too.
forth. So thank you so much for being here. How could people find you?
Yeah, the best way to find me is on my website. It's Michael V as in Victor Huber, HUBER.com. Everything that you could possibly want to know about me is there. There's all sorts of resources, podcasts, blog posts, all those things, socials. So it's kind of home base for me.
Great. And if there was like one golden nugget you wanted to leave to our listeners all over the world, what would that be?
Oh wow! I asked the same question on my podcast, and it's a really hard question to answer. I know it stumps a lot of people, and it's kind of stumped me. I mean, listen, I think the one thing I would leave with them, especially if you're a parent, is ask those questions, right? Ask the question before you make a statement. If you do that, that is going to go a long way to building the relationship and getting the outcomes that you want as a parent.
100%. I totally agree. And as I always say, give your kids a childhood they won't have to heal from. And in
Yes.
order to do that, ask those questions and be curious, not critical. Thank you so much for joining us, Michael. And listeners,
Thank
we'll see
you.
you next week. Us on another episode of Redefine Parenting with Veenu Keller. Follow her on Instagram at Veenu Inspires. To learn more about Veenu, as well as download her free ebook now, go to www.veenuinspires.com. This show can also be heard on Spanglish Radio Network. Please check out www.spanglishworld.ca for all your news and programming. Spanglish World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it.